Welcome to the Perspective Knoll, a home to original fantasy stories. Videos are uploaded once a week, feel free to like and subscribe. Enjoy the journey. The Lawman and the Druid, written by Anthony Buccino. Chapter 1, COVID. Indeed, these are difficult times for us to be living in, and more so if you don't have a job, and have to be creative in how you're going to pay the bills month to month. Shawn Harken, a 27-year-old journalist for the Arizona Cardinals, is pleased under the circumstances that he is still able to work. Over the past 3 years, he has covered the games, practices and individual players and staff members over the strategies and health of the team. He is regarded very highly by the team owner himself, William Bidwill. Shawn lives in Peoria, Arizona with his wife Lori. She comes from a wealthy father, and he promised that after her mother died, he would make sure his daughters were taken care of. Lori has a few hobbies of her own, which include horse riding and training, and she really enjoys going out on hikes in the early mornings before the heat gets too unbearable. Staring at a blank screen, Shawn tried to search for the best words in the opening sentence for his latest report on his laptop. At the tail end of last year's season, the Cardinals were still putting up some good numbers but were out of the playoffs. He was bummed that they finished with just 5 wins and 10 losses for the season, and a tie with their very first game. He had high hopes even as he watched the Super Bowl for the team's upcoming season, but ever since the coronavirus spiked in early March, it seemed maybe this illness was something very different and shouldn't be taken lightly. Shawn began to work from home and made it difficult to put out the real news and the emotions of the players while the quarantine was being upheld. He heard 2 days ago on one of his favorite podcasts that there might not be a season this year if the numbers don't start dropping. "My love, how is it coming?" asked Lori as she poked her head into his office. Her black hair was up in a ponytail, and it swayed greatly as she whipped into the room. She was dressed in her usual hiking clothes, a tank top, and some compression shorts, and was holding a bottle of water in her hand. As to be expected, he answered as he stared at her with a nearly defeated look. "How was your hike?" "Not bad actually, Vicky and Sandra made it out there and we had a nice woman's climb. Which reminds me, Sandra told me that Ken was wondering if you wanted to have a barbecue this weekend at their place. You know, throw some darts, put on some reruns of the games and all that." Shawn smiled, but again it was not from enjoyment. He shook his head and sighed. "You know, if I would have known that last year was going to be the last year of football or of sports in general, I would have taken my time with it a bit more." He paused and looked up at his sociology degree hanging up on his wall above a tall filing cabinet. "This pandemic sucks, simple as that, and I know it's been playing into my moods lately, and I'm sorry, truly Lori, I am." She gave him a sympathetic look and came into the room and hugged him while he was still sitting in his chair. "It's going to be okay. We all have to do our part, and who knows, by Christmas we all could be laughing about this COVID-19 shit." She stood up straight and glanced over at the blank screen on Shawn's laptop. "Everyone has their days. Why don't you and I get out? Let's go to the park, throw a frisbee, something, you and me, get ice cream too, what do you think?" He knew by her tone and her body language that she was not asking, it was a demand, and if he didn't go along with it, he might as well get ready for an argument and start setting up his bed on the couch. "But you just got home, are you sure?" he asked, and he was not in the mood to go out amongst the people. "I wouldn't have asked if I wasn't sure, now come on, throw on some cooler clothes." She gave him a kiss on his forehead and left the room. Shawn chuckled at his wife, but in a good way. They had been together long enough that she was able to read him easily. He turned back to the screen. "Until next time," he said out loud and closed the laptop. "Wow, I feel so much better, a beautiful Arizona day. Finally getting outside and breathing some good old-fashioned fresh air." Shawn was excited to be out of his 4 walls. "So, what do you think about the Cardinals this season? Are they going to play at all?" Shawn was thinking out loud and tried to get Lori to jump into the conversation. She wasn't the biggest fan of sports, she could appreciate them and like to play too, but her focus was on other things. With everything happening in Arizona regarding COVID-19 at this time, the true reality is nobody knows. Half the country is shut down, and I feel bad for small businesses who are struggling to make ends meet, Lori replied. Shawn's cell phone rang, and the name read Charles Detective. "Hi Charles, how's my favorite homicide detective? We haven't talked lately. What's going on in your life?" "Same old thing, people killing their best friends' husbands or wives," Charles answered, and very casually. "Hey, what about the fall season of 2020? Your Cardinals better be ready because my Bills are going all the way this season. Shawn answers, doesn't look very promising. All the players are ready to leave for training camp, but who knows? I haven't been allowed to get close to the team with COVID still on the rise. How's life in the detective world? I have a sweet little old lady that is charged with killing her 73-year-old husband. Shawn was caught off guard and was slow to respond. Do you think she really did it? In my heart of hearts, no, but all the evidence shows a very different story. Charles answered. Well, Charles, you are the smartest detective I know, tell me what you really think happened. Charles took in a deep breath. The facts are, she couldn't possibly have killed her husband, but she insists she did. After all the years on the force, I'm really stumped on this one. Here are just a few facts of the case. Charles was about to start spitballing details of the case when Shawn interrupted him. Wait, are you able to give up facts over the phone on an unsolved case? Shawn asked. Right, Christ, what was I thinking? It's been a long day, Shawn, and lots of sleepless nights just behind me as well. There have been a couple more cases that just popped up and they too are head-scratchers. Charles paused and Shawn could hear another person speaking in the background to Charles. Hey, I got to go, but I'm in town, well I'm just down the road in Goodyear. How about we get together tonight? Yeah, sure thing, we'll talk more and slam down a soda or two along with some pizza. Sound good? Shawn had asked knowing that Charles was incapable of turning away pizza. Sounds great, see you at your place then, how about around 6? That works, see you then, bye. Shawn heard Charles say bye and the line disconnected. He turned to Laurie and she made a funny look, but it wasn't one of those bad looks as if he was about to get in trouble. Well, Charles is coming over tonight. Really, we haven't got together with him in a while, how is he? Laurie asked. A bit shook up from the sounds of it. He says he got some troubling cases recently and wants to run them by me, I suppose to get a fresh, outsider's mind on it. Shawn looked up the road at the ice cream building they had been walking towards and back at Laurie. What is it? She asked, seeming troubled. It's closed, see the sign, he replied downheartedly. The Swirl, an ice cream business, was its rightful logo and had been a great hangout for them ever since they moved there, but as time wore on, the coronavirus has slowly been killing small and locally owned businesses. That's a bummer, she said with her hands on her hips. Screw it, let's go hit up the Sonic close to the house and get 2 large Sonic Blast. All right. Shawn took Laurie's hand and led her to the car. The evening came faster than expected, and of course it does when you're preparing for guests. Laurie ordered pizza and they were awaiting their contactless food to be delivered. Charles had showed up just as the pizza arrived, a little after 6. Charles Woods was a dark-skinned man and was showing signs of grey in his beard. It's not like he was young, he's aging very well for a man in his late 50s. Shawn met Charles through his son, Larry. The pair of them went to Oregon State together and both went in for sociology. Sadly, Larry was killed in a fatal car accident late one night when he was driving home from Shawn's house by a drunk driver. Larry hadn't drank that night, but Shawn still feels that given the late hour, he should have let his friend stay the night. So alright football, let's talk about it, I know it's on everyone's mind so here it is, the Washington State football team. That just sounds ridiculous. Laughed Charles as he picked up another slice of pizza and sat back down on the sofa. The three of them were sitting down in the living room, on the black couch. The pizza sat in the middle of the short coffee table and the TV was on mute and tuned into CNN. They were drinking out of red Solo cups and sharing a 2-liter of Dr. Pepper, which they all agreed was the best soda. That's right, they aren't the Washington Redskins anymore, said Laurie. I can't believe it's taken them this long to change the name. That's what I'm saying, so what the hell are they going to call them now, asked Charles. I got it, the Washington Apaches. Shawn then roared with laughter and Charles and Laurie joined in and knew that he was joking. I still like the Redskins, said Charles as he took a sip of his drink. Racism is too strong in our country today and I believe that and the whole George Floyd incident, shit is just insane now. Laurie and Shawn looked at one another and then back to Charles. Shawn had a question, but he wasn't sure if he was going to offend his friend or not. Charles caught this thought and smiled politely. Look, so as you guys may have guessed, I have been flying solo as a detective for the last 2 months. Henry was outraged about the police brutality clash with the Black Lives Matter community, and he said some stuff while we were working on a case that led me to believe that he might not have my back anymore because of my color. Charles finished his drink and placed his cup on the coffee table. Sorry to hear that, said Laurie with genuine sympathy. So did he get fired because of what he said? Sort of. I told my boss that I need to find a replacement, and until then I'm gonna go solo. It's not like I need a partner, but having another set of eyes out there plus experience makes a world of difference in my line of work. So, last I heard he is on temporary suspension and there is no set date as to when he will return to work. So, you mentioned a case earlier, an old woman killing her husband? Shawn was trying to change the subject. He wasn't a racist, but when it came to debates, he wasn't afraid to speak his mind, yet that's what normally gets people in trouble. The power of words can truly destroy a person from the inside out and burn bridges, whether it's an opinion or fact. Ah yes, it's so weird you guys. Let me take you to 3 days ago, in a quiet old folks' community housing of Rose Gardens. Chapter 2. 3 days ago, Charles had approached the property of Ed and Chloe Spencer just after 8 o'clock in the evening. He climbed out of his Suburban and placed his surgical mask on, which was still mandatory at all times. There were 3 police vehicles outside when he had pulled up and 2 officers were under the carport exchanging notes, and even though their masks were around their mouths, neither of them had their noses covered and Charles couldn't help but to roll his eyes. One of them noticed Charles about to walk in the front door when he told him to stop. "Whoa, who are you?" The shorter officer on the right said as he moved closer to Charles, and in the light, he could see the name on his badge. "Deputy J. Smith. My name is Charles Woods, I'm a detective and Chief Alan Mortimer has asked me to come over and check things out." Charles had shown the deputy his badge and gave a simple wave to the other officer who remained looking down at his notepad. "All right, proceed then," said the officer, and he returned to his comrade under the carport. Charles entered the house and saw 2 more officers standing in the kitchen, and there was an old woman sitting in a rocking chair watching an old black and white show on TV. Charles recognized it to be the Munsters. There was a tap on his shoulder and Charles turned to face the 2 men, both of whom were wearing their masks the proper way. "You the detective, right?" asked the one who tapped him. "Yes, Charles Woods," he answered. "Good, I'm Lieutenant Matthew Galloway, this here is Officer Fred Lawrence." The men nodded to one another. "So did the chief get you all up to speed here?" "Nah, he left out the details, but I got the gist of it." Is that her, the wife?" he asked, pointing over his shoulder. "Yeah, that's her," Matthew answered with a grim expression. "Okay," said Charles slowly. "So why is she still here and not handcuffed? What is this?" "Come here," said Matthew, and the 3 of them went down the hall and passed by 2 bedrooms before they came to a closed door at the end. "Brace yourself." Charles wasn't sure what to expect, but he did take a deep breath and nodded to show he was ready. When Matthew opened the door, he stepped against the door frame to be out of Charles' line of sight. Before Charles focused on anything, the smell of a freshly rotting corpse hit his nose. Upon entering the room, it seemed fine and well kept, but then he peered over to the bed and that's where the gruesome scene lay. There was a man, covered up in bed as if he'd been asleep for some time, but there was something missing. There was blood splattered all over the wall, and the nightstand and the pillow were covered in chunks of flesh and bone and brain matter. Charles walked a little closer, trying not to lose the contents of his stomach. He looked around and the only thing that was out of place was a bowling ball that was covered with more blood and chunks of human remains. "She did this?" asked Charles, trying to find his voice, and what he could muster was shaky at best. "We believe so," answered Matthew, not entering the room. "She claims she has no memory of the event. Doesn't even think she did it, but knows somehow that she did," chimed in Fred as he looked over his shoulder to make sure Chloe Spencer wasn't in earshot. Charles examined the bowling ball, he walked around it and, on one side, found the numbers 14 etched on it. Charles, having bowled enough in his lifetime, guessed that the number was the weight of the ball. He looked back at the headless body of Ed Spencer and wondered. He looked where his feet had been and noticed that the carpet was soft enough that it left an indentation where he stepped. He walked to the other side of the bed and that spot looked as though no one had stepped there all evening. The only thing that looked out of place was that the closet right side door was opened and Charles figured that's where Chloe had pulled the ball from. "So, what have you guys looked at since you've been here? What have you touched?" Charles was now getting in his rhythm. "Well, we got here, the woman allowed us in and she sat back down where she is now," began Matthew. Fred and I swept the home for anyone else inside and was surprised to see what we're seeing now. After that, Fred began interrogating her and I was going through the motions, filling out my notepad with as many details as I could fill in. Okay, a woman supposedly murders her husband with a bowling ball, Charles said out loud and peered into the master bathroom at the handicap shower for a moment, then he quickly left the room and went back to Chloe. She was still enjoying her show and when he came into view, she smiled at him and adjusted her glasses. He eyed her for a moment without saying anything. Mrs. Spencer, my name is Detective Charles Woods, can I ask you to do something, just a couple of simple tasks? Charles asked, the sweat now accumulating on his forehead. Ask away, detective, she answered politely. Can I ask you to take a sip of that glass next to you? He pointed to a small glass of water on the table next to her. She reached for the glass, slowly, and picked it up, and as she brought it in front of her, Charles noticed that it shook so much that she needed the other hand to steady it before drinking out of it. The wheels in Charles' head began to pick up speed. She can hardly hold a cup that weighs maybe 2 pounds, yet she claims she killed her husband with a 15-pound bowling ball. He had another thought. Can you please stand up for me and walk into the kitchen? She nodded and sighed greatly, and with much effort she pushed herself out of the chair and shuffled toward the kitchen. She turned around and looked at him. Was that good? Yes, Mrs. Spencer, that was fine, he replied, and yet another thought passed through him. How many strokes have you had? Strokes? 2, I think, well maybe. At least one, back in 2018, or maybe it was last year, 2019, she said, and walked over to the nearest counter to lean her hip against. Who killed your husband? He asked blankly. Well, I did, of course. No, bullshit. Now tell me who annihilated your husband's face? His patience was wearing thin and he could feel his heart beginning to race. He was furious all of a sudden and couldn't figure out why. She was slightly taken aback with his tone and cleared her throat. Look, I know it sounds ridiculous, but I did do it. I don't remember doing it, but I must have. I remember everything this evening. We went out for food at the JB's up the road. We came back, put on some reruns, and he said he was tired and going to turn in early. I don't remember the finer details after that moment. The next thing I knew, I was standing there beside the bed and looking at him. She began to cry, and it was at this moment that it was finally hitting her the realization of what had happened.